Next up, as I said, we have David Schultz. He's going to give us a little education on what is rail code, like code 18, code 23, code 100. So David Dropbox Schultz, you're on.
I've been called a lot of things, but never Dropbox. But all right, well, welcome everybody. This is kind of going to be a yawner, I think, of a presentation, but we'll try to make it as interesting as possible. Rail is kind of the foundation of railroads. And in the early days, rail was basically made out of, I'm assuming, like 4x4s with, steel strap on top of it. And as things got heavier and heavier, of course, they had to change the way rail was made. And so they came up with iron rails. But what they discovered pretty early on is things were getting heavier and heavier. Iron was kind of a soft metal. Well, of course, came along steel. They figured out if they added some carbon to the rail, it would get stronger and stronger. And of course, you go into the metallurgy part of it. They've discovered other things that make rail really hard. In fact, it can get so hard that it'll break. But that's, like I say, off into the weeds. But anyway, rail sizes in the real world, they had 12-pound rail. And the way they came up with their weights on rail, this will really drive the metric folks nuts, is that they took a 3-foot piece of the rail, weighed it, and that would be what they'd consider the weight of the rail. So 1 yard of rail weighs 12 pounds, it's a 12-pound rail. And of course, it worked its way all the way up to, I think, Pennsylvania had 155 or 156-pound rail, which is just got to be amazing stuff. But the weights of the rail, changed with the size of the ball of the rail, which is the top part of the rail. The web can be anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick, and then the base of the rail. But they pretty much got it settled on a kind of a standard size. But anyway, that's how they came up with the weights of the rail. So then in the model railroading world, they decided to come up with a code for the rail. And the code was simply the thickness of the rail. And I've got 3 photos to kind of demonstrate that. So whoever's handling the photo section, if you want to put the first of 3 up. So here we've got a piece of rail, and this is code 100 rail. And the manufacturer will tell you that's plus or minus a couple percentages. So, this is coming out at 98, but it's code 100 rail. So it's 100 thousandths of an inch thick, or basically 1/10 of an inch thick. And in the HO world, that was big rail, and in the O scale world, it's not. Next photo. Here we've got 138, code 138, coming in at 140. But once again, code 138. And then the last photo, and this is code 83. That comes in right on 83 thousandths of an inch thick. And that's where they came up with the idea of code. And the reason I came up with this program, I've had people on my O scale railroad, I'm using code 100 on some of the sidings and stuff. And I had a gentleman comment, why are you using HO rail on your O scale layout? And code 100 isn't necessarily HO rail. It could be pretty much for any scale, depending upon the weight of the rail that you want. So I made up a little chart explaining some of this, going all the way down to code 40. Now, I've never seen code 40 rail. N scalers probably have, because in N scale, code 40 comes up to 115-pound rail, which is about right for mainline railroading today. In S scale, it's 25-pound rail. In HO rail, it's 70-pound rail. And in O scale, it's 12 pounds. So in O scale, you probably use it for like the rail going into a speeder shed. That was very light rail, probably left over from the old mining days with the mine carts and stuff. 25-pound rail in S scale, not really sure where you'd use that. HO could use code 40. It's 70-pound rail. That'd be something to work with, I would think, in HO scale. Then you move up to the code 55 thousandths of an inch. N scale, that's 156-pound rail. That's pretty heavy duty stuff. So I think that's kind of their standard. I'm not sure. The N scalers could probably clarify that, but I think code 55 is probably what they're using for the most part. And yet that's a little large for unless you're doing the most modern of railroads today. But you get down that small, tough to tell anyway. In HO, that's 70-pound rail. And In S scale, it's 40-pound rail, and in O scale, it's 25-pound rail. So you can see that these codes all work in all 4 scales, the ones that I'm mentioning. Now an O scale, once again, it's pretty small, 25-pound rail. But then you move up to code 70, N scale, that's 195. HO is 100-pound rail. So that's pretty popular in HO, I would think. S scale, 60-pound rail, and O scale is 40 pounds. Still not real usable in O scale. I'm sure there's, I think I would use something like that for maybe a check rail on bridges and the like. But then you get up to the more popular one, the code 83. Now, I think that's most of my friends who are in HO, that's the rail they like to use. And for good reason. It comes out to about 132-pound rail, give or take a little bit. In N scale, it's 227 pounds. That's pretty heavy duty stuff. Not even made today. So, and S scale, that's 90-pound rail. So code 83 would be nice in S scale if you're doing branch lines or old railroad. And O scale, that's 60-pound rail. That works well for some sidings. I've seen grain elevators, old grain elevators, and for the most part abandoned, but they still had 60 and 70-pound rail going to these grain elevators. Back in the day of 40-foot cars, 60-pound rail was more than enough. And then the old standard, the code 100. So I didn't even bother with N scale anymore because that's got to be up there close to 300-pound rail. In HO, that was 156 pounds. So you can kind of see why people moved away from that and down to code 83 for HO. S scale, it's 115-pound rail. Code 100 worked beautifully for them. In O scale, it's 80 to 90-pound rail. And next up was the 125. In S scale, that's 136-pound rail. O scale, 100-pound rail. And then finally 138, which is what I'm using, that's 115. And then code 148 is 136. So you can see the code really has nothing to do with the scale of the train. It just really depends upon what you're modeling. If you're modeling sidings, you're modeling main line, you can use a variety of rails in any scale. There isn't a particular scale for any of that. It's just depends upon what you're looking for in your modeling, the size of the rail you want to put in. That's, without getting too heavy duty into the weeds, that's about what I have for this week. But next month, we're going to talk about the difference between scale and gauge. That seems to be a real confusing part also. People are confusing gauge with scale. And of course, in O scale, we got Lionel that, their older stuff, they just kind of, I think some of their old boxers and stuff would probably scratch or kit bash well into S scale cars, and yet they would call that O scale. So that'll we'll try and straighten some of that out for the next show. But that's kind of what I have for tonight on rail without putting people to sleep too much. When I started looking into this, you can really get off into the weeds because the study of rail is something that's, just gone way beyond what most of us even think about anymore. The wear and trying to fight, the breakage in winter, how they lay the rail and stuff. So I just thought I'd stick with the code part so people don't confuse code with scale.
David?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was great because a lot of people do confuse the code with scale. I think for the next show, if you could, we could post that table, or if you email me that table, I'll dress it up for you. We could post that at the beginning of your show, and then you might want to just mention wheel flanges too, because there's all flanges all over the place with model railroading.
Yep.
And that would be an interesting one as well with your, maybe that could fit in with your scale and gauge program.
Yeah, because I'm doing Proto 48, so I can show like the difference of standard O scale and then fine scale and Proto 48 and there's many different flanges and stuff. So I can put together something. I've got a few older Lionel cars that I can compare to what I've got now, and then like you and I were talking about, the narrow gauge railroading. Yeah. And anyway, like I say, without getting too deep into it, but we'll get something put together here for the next time.
One final clarification: when you say pounds per rail, that's per foot. Is that what we're talking?
No, it's per yard.
See?
3 foot.
So there we
Yeah, it's a
go.
3-foot section. And like I say, I don't know where they came up with that. Probably 150 years ago, and they're still using that dimension to this day. But it's
Well,
the weight of a 3-foot section of rail.
that's a little bit of information I didn't know. So
Yeah,
see,
that's where they came up with that. And then, like I say, in scale, they just decided whatever the thickness of the rail is. So, like the 125 rail in O scale, that's basically 6 inches tall. So
yeah.
that corresponds pretty well with 115-pound rail. But I've seen people go off, and actually it's 7¼ inches tall. And it's like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Well,
Manufacturers can only do so much with it. So,
I think it's an interesting topic, and it's a very educational because I'm certain there was a lot of confusion on scale versus code. So
yep,
thank you for this, and we look forward to your next presentation.
very good. Thank you, guys.